the path to inner freedom, letting go of false narratives and embracing who you truly are. Have you ever paused and wondered, who am I really? Not the version you show to the world, not the person you've been taught to be by your family, your friends, or society, but the real you, the one buried beneath years of expectations, judgments, and the weight of labels you've carried for a lifetime. The question is both simple and profound, and yet it remains elusive for many of us. We spend so much of our lives living according to what others expect of us, that we forget the person we were before all the noise began. This, my friends, is the search for true freedom, freedom that has nothing to do with the outer world. Not freedom from work, from relationships, or from responsibilities. No, this is a deeper, quieter freedom. The freedom that arises when you let go of the false narratives you've been living by. The freedom that exists within you, untouched by time, undisturbed by the past, and unconcerned by any imagined future. Picture this: you are walking down a dusty, deserted road. In your hands you carry a heavy sack. Every step feels harder than the last, the burden growing heavier with each passing moment. You look inside the sack and you realize every rock inside represents a belief you've carried for years. I must be successful to be loved. I am not enough because of my past mistakes. The rocks are small but countless, each one heavier than the last. Your shoulders ache, your steps slow, but you keep walking, convinced that this is the way. But then something shifts. A quiet realization whispers inside, you don't have to carry this anymore. The sack is not part of you. The weight you feel is not the truth of who you are. You stop. You bend down, open the sack, and let go of each stone one by one. The first one drops, then the next, and with each release you feel lighter. The burden fades, and soon you stand free. No weight, no expectations, just you. This moment, my friend, is the beginning of your journey to true freedom, the path to letting go of everything you were never meant to carry. And if you're wondering how to embark on this transformative journey, stay with me, because this video holds the key to discovering the truth that has always been inside you, waiting for you to let go of the stories and beliefs that have kept you shackled. The freedom you seek is not somewhere out there. It is here, inside you, waiting to be uncovered. Stick with me until the end of this video and let's walk this path together, because the wisdom you'll learn today may just change the course of your life forever. So, I invite you to take a deep breath. Let go of the distractions, of the stories you've been telling yourself for years, and get ready to discover the truth of who you truly are. Watch till the end, leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because what we are about to uncover will transform the way you see yourself forever. Part 1. The Buddha's Teachings on Letting Go. The core teachings of the Buddha have always centered around the wisdom of impermanence, anicca, and the need to release attachments. The essence of this teaching is simple, yet profoundly transformative. Everything in life is in a constant state of change. Nothing remains the same, not even our thoughts, emotions, or the very breath that sustains us. Yet, despite this truth, we cling to the illusion of permanence. We cling to people, places, and things. We cling to the identities we have constructed for ourselves over the years, often forgetting that these identities are just another form of attachment. The Buddha did not just speak about the impermanence of the physical world. He spoke about the impermanence of our mental and emotional states as well. Our minds are like rivers, constantly flowing, constantly changing. Yet we tend to hold on to specific thoughts, stories, and feelings as though they were eternal truths. When we cling to these thoughts and labels, we imprison ourselves in a cage of our own making. This is the essence of suffering, the refusal to see life as it is in its ever-changing, fluid state. It is the attachment to these transient things that binds us to cycles of dissatisfaction and pain. Buddhism teaches that to break free from suffering, we must practice non-attachment. This is not the same as rejecting life, responsibilities, or emotions. Non-attachment does not mean we become cold or indifferent to the world around us. It simply means that we release our attachment to outcomes, to the expectations we place upon ourselves, and to the identities we believe we must uphold. By letting go of our attachment to the fixed self, we open ourselves to true freedom. One of the most profound lessons on non-attachment comes from the story of Vimalakirti, a lay practitioner in Buddhist history. Vimalakirti was known for his wisdom and deep spiritual insight, and his teachings continue to inspire. On one occasion, the Buddha asked him to teach the monks about the true nature of reality. What Vimalakirti shared was a teaching that resonated deeply. The world is like a dream, a mirage. You cannot grasp it, and when you try to, you only bind yourself to illusion. This teaching is crucial. We often live our lives as though the external world, our identities, and the stories we tell ourselves are permanent truths. But the Buddha and Vimalakirti challenge us to see the truth that the world and all of our perceptions are fleeting. Everything we experience is like a dream, constantly changing and passing away. When we become attached to these fleeting experiences, we create suffering for ourselves. We cling to the dream, believing it to be real, when in fact it is all impermanent. Each one of us carries with us a narrative about who we are. These are the stories we tell ourselves about our worth, our purpose, and our place in the world. Perhaps you believe you must always be successful to be loved, or that you must be perfect in order to be valued. These false narratives are often rooted in the expectations of others, the things we are told we should achieve, how we should look, and who we should become. We're called the strong one in your family, and over time this became your identity. Or perhaps you were told that success is the only measure of your worth, and you've spent your life chasing this ideal. These stories become so ingrained in our being that we often cannot see them for what they are, illusions. And these illusions hold us captive. I think of Layla, a woman I once met who struggled with this exact issue. Leela was an accomplished career woman, respected by her peers and her family. But deep inside, she felt as though she was a failure. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself in a competitive world, believing that if she didn't achieve the highest standards, she would be unworthy of love and respect. But as she grew older, she began to feel exhausted, empty, and disconnected. It wasn't until she encountered the Buddha's teachings on letting go of false narratives that she began to see that her life had been driven by the story of success equals worth. In truth, she had been clinging to an identity that wasn't even hers. It was a role she had played to meet others' expectations, but it had never reflected her true nature. Leela's journey to freedom started when she realized that true freedom comes when we stop identifying with the roles we play and begin embracing who we are beneath the labels. We are more than what we do. We are more than our accomplishments. We are the awareness that witnesses the ever-changing flow of life. We often think of perfection as the goal in life, whether in our work, our relationships, or even in our own selves. We are taught to strive for the ideal, to fix what is broken, and to make everything flawless. But this attachment to perfection, to the ideal version of ourselves, is yet another false narrative. The truth is, nothing in life is perfect, and trying to cling to an idealized version of ourselves only causes us to feel inadequate when we inevitably fall short. Take a moment to think about the people in your life whom you admire most. Do they seem perfect? Or are they authentic, deeply connected to themselves, and compassionate? True beauty and wisdom often come from embracing imperfection, from seeing the value in our flaws and our struggles. As the Buddha taught, life is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about being fully aware of who we are in this moment, not who we think we should be or who we used to be. What does it mean to truly let go? Letting go is not about rejecting life or withdrawing from the world. It is about engaging with life fully, without clinging to it. It is about realizing that life is transient and that our role is not to control or hold onto it, but to experience it as it is. The practice of mindfulness, which the Buddha taught, is key to this process. Mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts, feelings, and experiences without attaching to them. We do not identify with them. We do not hold on to them. We simply witness them and let them pass like clouds in the sky. In one famous Zen story, a master was teaching his students how to approach the practice of mindfulness. He told them, "When you eat, just eat. When you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. And when the mind wanders, gently bring it back to the present moment." This practice is the essence of letting go, being fully present without attachment. It is a practice of embracing the fleeting nature of life and releasing the need to control it. It is not about letting go in the sense of giving up. It is about letting go of the illusion of control and accepting life as it is. When we begin to release the false narratives and illusions that bind us, we find ourselves free to live in the present moment, free to embrace our true selves, and free to experience life with a deep sense of peace and clarity. In the end, the Buddha's teachings on letting go are not just philosophical concepts. They are practical guidelines for living a life of true freedom. When we understand the impermanence of all things, when we let go of attachment to identity, success, and perfection, we begin to experience life as it truly is, a beautiful, fleeting, and ever-changing journey. So, I invite you to take a moment to reflect. What are the false narratives you have been holding onto? What identities, roles, or expectations are you ready to let go of? And when you let go, what is left? Only the truth of who you truly are, alive, awake, and free. This is the path to freedom. Letting go of the illusions, embracing the present moment, and living fully as the authentic self you were always meant to be. Part 2. Recognizing the false narratives. Before we can let go of false narratives, we must first recognize them. In our lives, we carry stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Some of these stories were passed down by our families, society, or our own past experiences. These narratives shape our understanding of ourselves and influence how we interact with the world. They define how we see our worth, our place in the world, and what we believe we need to achieve in order to feel whole. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. What stories have you been telling yourself about who you are? What labels have you worn so long that they have become a part of you, shaping your every decision and action? For many of us, the stories we tell ourselves revolve around external validation. Perhaps you were raised with the belief that you must always strive for achievement, that your value is measured by external success, such as your job title, income, or social status. Maybe you were taught that love must come with conditions and that to be truly loved you must earn it. Or perhaps you've been convinced that your worth is tied to your appearance, your wealth, or your ability to meet society's ever-changing standards. These false narratives are the chains that bind us to an identity that is not our own. They push us to achieve, to perform, to conform, but they don't ask the essential question: who are we really? Beyond the titles, the roles, and the expectations, who is the person underneath it all? The Buddha teaches us that suffering arises from attachment, and we often attach ourselves to these false narratives. We become so wrapped up in these external labels that we forget our true nature. The more we cling to these illusions, the more we suffer because they are fragile, they are impermanent, and they do not represent the truth of who we are. I often think about Sarah, a woman in her mid-50s who I met during my travels. She had spent most of her life as a successful lawyer, driven by the need to prove herself to her parents, her peers, and even herself. She came from a family where success was seen as the ultimate measure of worth. Growing up, Sarah was told, if you want to be valuable, you must achieve. So she did. She achieved everything: top grades, a prestigious law degree, a successful career, a beautiful house, and a family. On the outside, she had it all, yet she felt empty inside. One day, as we sat by the river, Sarah shared something with me that still resonates. She said, "I've always been chasing success, but now that I have it, I don't feel any different. I thought when I finally achieved all of this, I'd feel complete, but I feel lost, like something is missing and I don't know what it is." Sarah's story is not unique. Many of us are caught in the same trap, believing that success, wealth, or approval will fill the emptiness inside. But what happens when these external achievements are no longer enough? What happens when we realize that the goalposts keep shifting and we're constantly running after something that is never truly attainable? This is when the suffering begins, when the false narrative of success equals worth falls apart. Sarah's turning point came when she finally recognized the false narrative she had been living. She realized that her worth was never tied to her achievements. She had been seeking approval from others her whole life, and the more she achieved, the further away she felt from her true self. When Sarah let go of the narrative that her value was tied to what she could accomplish, she felt a profound shift. She started to reconnect with herself, not as a lawyer, not as a mother, not as a successful career woman, but as simply Sarah, a human being with intrinsic worth, just as she was. One of the most insidious false narratives we carry is the need for perfection. Society constantly tells us that we must be perfect. Perfect parents, perfect employees, perfect friends, perfect partners. We are sold the idea that in order to be loved, accepted, and respected, we must fit a certain mold. But the truth is, perfection is an illusion. The Buddha taught that the attachment to perfection is one of the greatest sources of suffering. This is because perfection is unattainable, and the pressure to be perfect keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-criticism, anxiety, and frustration. It's a never-ending chase that leads to exhaustion because we can never fully measure up. Let me share a story about John, an elderly man I met at a meditation retreat. John had spent most of his life as a successful businessman, driven by the idea that his worth was tied to his ability to control everything in his life. His family, his career, his finances, everything had to be in order, perfect, and predictable. But as he grew older, he began to realize that his obsession with perfection had alienated him from his family, and his inner peace. One afternoon, during a group meditation session, John broke down in tears. He said, "I spent so many years chasing after perfection. I thought if I controlled everything, I would be happy. But I never found peace. Now I look back at my life and see how much I missed, how much I didn't enjoy, how many relationships I neglected, all because I was focused on being perfect." John's story highlights an important truth. When we attach ourselves to the idea of perfection, we miss out on life itself. We miss the beauty of the imperfect moments, the rawness, and the vulnerability that make us human. Now, take a moment to think about the false narratives in your own life. What are the stories you've been telling yourself? Do you believe that you are only worthy if you meet certain standards, or if you live up to someone else's expectations? Perhaps you've been told that your value is tied to how you look, your wealth, your job title, or the roles you play in your family. These beliefs may have been passed down to you as early as childhood, and over time, you've internalized them as truths. You may not even realize that these are false narratives because they have become so deeply ingrained in your sense of identity. But ask yourself, what would happen if you let go of these beliefs? What if you could see yourself beyond the labels, beyond the need for approval, beyond the quest for perfection? The Buddha taught that true freedom comes when we let go of our attachments, not only to physical things, but to the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. By recognizing the false narratives we've been living by, we can begin to free ourselves from the mental prisons we've built. When we release these attachments, we open ourselves to the truth of who we truly are. We are not the stories we tell ourselves. We are not the roles we play. We are not the expectations placed upon us by society. We are the awareness that watches it all unfold. And when we recognize that, we experience true freedom. Once you begin to let go of these false narratives, you will start to experience a deep sense of relief, a sense of coming home to yourself. It's as if the weight that has been pressing on your shoulders for years begins to lift. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to fit into anyone else's mold. You are free to live authentically, to be yourself without fear, without shame. The Buddha's teachings on letting go offer us the freedom to be who we truly are, without the need for external validation or the approval of others. When we recognize the false narratives we've been carrying, we can finally embrace the truth of our being. Letting go is not a loss. It is a liberation. It is the freedom to step into the fullness of who we were always meant to be, beyond the stories we've been telling ourselves. Part 3, Story of Ananda, the Path of Self-Realization. In the early days of Buddhism, there was a disciple named Ananda, one of the closest to the Buddha, and his story serves as a powerful reminder of the journey from self-doubt to self-realization. Though Ananda was deeply revered for his wisdom and compassion, he often struggled with his own inner conflict. He felt overshadowed by the great monks who surrounded the Buddha. In his heart, he believed he was unworthy to lead the Sangha after the Buddha's passing. His self-doubt ran deep. He felt that he was somehow less capable, less important, and less deserving of the role that others might have expected him to take. This narrative that Ananda carried was a powerful example of how we attach ourselves to false beliefs. His doubts about his worth and his abilities were not rooted in any true reflection of his skills or virtues, but in the narrative he had created based on the comparison to others. He measured his value based on what others thought of him, on external expectations rather than his intrinsic qualities. Ananda's inner battle was the same as many of us face, the false narrative that we are not enough. He believed that because he was not as outwardly accomplished or revered as some of the other monks, he lacked the authority to lead or guide others. He was a man caught in the illusion of inadequacy, despite the fact that the Buddha had always seen his deep wisdom and immense potential. One day, the Buddha noticed Ananda's struggle. With his usual compassion, the Buddha spoke to Ananda, reminding him that true wisdom does not come from the recognition or validation of others, but from within oneself. The Buddha said, "Ananda, the wisdom you seek is already within you. It does not come from the expectations or judgments of others. It is found when you let go of these false beliefs about who you think you should be." The Buddha's words were a powerful turning point for Ananda. In that moment, he understood that his journey wasn't about measuring himself against the achievements or titles of others, but about connecting deeply with the truth within himself. His worth, his wisdom, his leadership, none of these were contingent on external validation. They were inherent in his being. As Ananda allowed himself to release these false narratives, he found the courage to embrace his role within the Sangha. No longer burdened by self-doubt and comparison, he began to step into his true potential, leading with the wisdom and compassion that had always been a part of him. He realized that his worth was never defined by others' expectations, but by his connection to the truth of who he was. Much like Ananda, we often find ourselves wrapped in false narratives, believing that we are unworthy or incapable of achieving what we desire. We get caught in stories that say, "I am not good enough," or "I will never be as successful as others." These beliefs, often instilled in us by society or our upbringing, are not truths. They are simply stories we have chosen to believe. Consider Sarah, a woman I met in my community. She had spent most of her life feeling invisible, believing she was not worthy of success or love. Raised in a family where achievements were celebrated and failures were stigmatized, she believed that her worth was tied to her ability to meet certain standards. As Sarah grew older, her fear of not measuring up paralyzed her. She often compared herself to others, believing that her worth was less because she hadn't achieved the same level of success or recognition. Her false narrative was rooted in the belief that she had to prove her value through outward accomplishments, a belief that kept her stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and inadequacy. But one day, Sarah made a pivotal decision. She sought guidance from a wise mentor who taught her about self-compassion and inner truth. Through years of practice, she began to peel away the false narratives that had been holding her back. She realized that her worth wasn't determined by achievements or approval from others. Instead, it was found in her connection to her authentic self, the part of her that was already whole, worthy, and capable of leading her own life with purpose and grace. The story of Ananda is deeply relevant to us all. Just like Ananda, we often attach our identities to the narratives that others tell us or that society imposes on us. We measure ourselves against the success of others, and in doing so, we lose sight of our own unique path. We forget that true wisdom and self-worth are not external qualities that can be measured or validated by others. They are found within. This false narrative of external validation often leads to suffering. We see others as benchmarks of success, and in doing so, we create unrealistic expectations for ourselves. We get trapped in a cycle of comparison, where we feel inadequate because we are constantly measuring our own progress against someone else's story. But the Buddha teaches us that the only true measure of our worth is our ability to connect with our own inner truth, a truth that is free from comparison, free from judgment, and free from the need for approval. Letting go of false narratives requires courage. It is the courage to face the stories we have believed for so long, to challenge the beliefs that have shaped our lives, and to choose to live in alignment with our true selves. It requires the courage to look inward and embrace who we truly are, without the layers of stories and labels we've accumulated over time. Take, for example, James, a man in his late 40s who had spent most of his life working in the corporate world, driven by the desire for approval and success. James was respected by his peers, but he often felt empty inside. His life had been defined by his job title, the awards on his shelf, and the recognition from others. But as he entered his 40s, James realized that he wasn't fulfilled by his external success. His life lacked meaning beyond the achievements. After a year of reflection and meditation, James began to see that his attachment to external validation was the root of his dissatisfaction. He had lived his life seeking approval from others, believing that his worth was tied to what others thought of him. Once James let go of these false narratives and focused on his true passions, he found fulfillment, not in the external accomplishments, but in his ability to live authentically. He embraced the role of a mentor, sharing his wisdom with younger colleagues, and found deep meaning in helping others succeed, not for recognition, but because it aligned with his true purpose. The story of Ananda, Sarah, and James teaches us a powerful lesson. When we stop attaching ourselves to the stories others have told us and start listening to the truth within, we begin to live authentically. The false narratives that keep us trapped in cycles of self-doubt and inadequacy lose their power when we stop giving them attention. True freedom comes when we release our attachment to the external and connect to the eternal truth within ourselves. This is the path of self-realization. It is the path of stepping away from false narratives and embracing the authentic self that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. As we walk this path of self-realization, we must embrace self-acceptance. The Buddha taught us to see ourselves clearly, without the distortions created by ego, fear, or societal conditioning. To truly live in alignment with our authentic selves, we must accept who we are right now, not as who we think we should be or who others want us to be, but as we truly are in this very moment. Self-acceptance is not complacency or resignation. It is the deep understanding that we are worthy as we are right now. And it is from this place of acceptance that true growth and transformation happen. When we let go of the false narratives that bind us, we make space for our true selves to emerge. In the end, the path to self-realization is about recognizing the false stories we've been telling ourselves and choosing, with courage and compassion, to let them go. It is about embracing the truth that we are already enough, just as we are, and that our true worth lies not in what we do, but in who we are at the core. Part 4: Buddhism and Authenticity, the Freedom of Self-Expression. Authenticity in the Buddhist context is not a goal to achieve or a state of being to perfect. It is the freedom to simply be fully and completely in the present moment. It is about shedding the weight of societal expectations, past experiences, and future anxieties, and reconnecting with the truest, most raw version of ourselves. Authenticity in Buddhism goes beyond the surface. It's not about how we present ourselves to the world, but about how deeply we understand who we are without the layers of illusion we often wear. To be authentic in a Buddhist sense is to be present without attachment, to stand in the fullness of the moment without the influence of judgment, fear, or doubt. It means that, rather than being shaped by the stories we have told ourselves about who we were or who we think we must become, we simply allow ourselves to experience each moment as it arises. Take, for example, the story of Siddhartha Gautama's enlightenment. When Siddhartha sat under the Bodhi tree, ready to meditate and face his deepest fears, doubts, and desires, he was approached by Mara, the demon of illusion. Mara sought to distract him from his meditation, tempting Siddhartha with visions of wealth, power, and even fear of failure. But rather than engaging with these distractions or even defending against them, Siddhartha chose to remain present. He chose to sit, to breathe, and to face his deepest emotions without being consumed by them. In that stillness, the truth revealed itself to Siddhartha. This is the moment when he reached enlightenment, not because he fought against the distractions, but because he simply sat with them. He was fully present, aware of the feelings and thoughts arising, but not attached to them. Siddhartha, in his meditative state, showed us the most profound aspect of Buddhism. True authenticity is born not from trying to control or resist the mind, but by simply allowing it to be as it is, and recognizing that we are not our thoughts, our fears, or our past experiences. In our own lives, we face distractions, doubts, and temptations that pull us away from the present. We fear we're not good enough. We struggle with the weight of our past mistakes. We worry about what the future holds, but the Buddha's path shows us that authenticity is not about fighting these distractions. It is about being willing to sit with them, observe them, and ultimately let them go. It's about freeing ourselves from the stories we've been carrying and realizing that we are not defined by those stories. When we talk about authenticity, it's easy to think of it as an outward expression, saying what's on our mind, doing what we want, and being true to ourselves. But in a Buddhist sense, true self-expression goes far deeper. It is about expressing ourselves not through external actions or achievements, but through the quiet wisdom of simply being ourselves. This means releasing the need to perform or be validated by others. Authenticity is the freedom to express our true nature without the burden of social conditioning. Consider Jasmine, a woman in her 60s who has spent her life as a caregiver. She raised her children, worked tirelessly in her career, and always put others first. But when her children grew up and she retired, she found herself lost. She felt as if she no longer knew who she was outside of the roles she had played. For years, Jasmine had lived her life according to the stories others had written for her. You're a mother. You're a professional. You're a good person if you help others. One day, after attending a meditation retreat, Jasmine had an insight. She realized that she had been living according to expectations, not her own desires or true feelings. She had been holding on to roles that no longer served her and had forgotten what it meant to truly live authentically. Through mindful reflection, she began to understand that her true self was not defined by what she had done or the roles she had played, but by her ability to simply be present, open, and receptive to life as it was. Jasmine's journey toward authenticity was not about changing her behavior, but about reconnecting with her inner self. She learned to be present in the moment, to let go of the pressure to perform, and to simply be herself without guilt or shame. In doing so, Jasmine found freedom to live as she truly was, not as she thought she was supposed to be. Buddhism teaches us that to be authentic, we must let go of the stories we have created about ourselves. These stories are often built on old experiences, societal conditioning, and judgments from others. Over time, we begin to believe that these stories are who we are. But the truth is, we are not our stories. We are the awareness behind them. Think about the story of Maria, a woman who had spent decades in a corporate job, always striving for success and approval. She had climbed the corporate ladder and was proud of her accomplishments. But as the years passed, Maria felt increasingly disconnected from herself. She realized that her life had been shaped entirely by the narrative of "I must achieve success to be valued." She had lived for others' approval, chasing goals she didn't truly care about, and all the while, she had suppressed her own desires and passions. It wasn't until Maria began practicing mindfulness and meditation that she started to understand the impermanence of the stories she had been living. Through meditation, Maria learned to observe her thoughts and let them pass like clouds in the sky. With time, she began to realize that the story of success equals worth was not true. It was just a story, one that she had outgrown. By letting go of this false narrative, Maria was able to reconnect with her true self, finding joy in the present moment rather than in future achievements. Her true self-expression blossomed when she stopped identifying with the roles she had been playing. Buddhism teaches that the true expression of who we are is not shaped by the outside world, but by our inner wisdom. When we are present and fully engaged with life, without attachment to outcomes or the pressure of expectations, we find that our authentic self naturally arises. This is the heart of Buddhist authenticity. It is not about outward action, but inward clarity. The more we release our attachment to the roles we play, the more we connect with our true nature, a nature that is already wise, compassionate, and peaceful. Consider David, a retired teacher who had always identified himself as a teacher first. After he left his career, David struggled with finding meaning in life. Without the identity of teacher, he felt as though he had lost his purpose. But through meditation and reflection, David realized that his true essence was not tied to a profession or title. His authentic self was about the love he had for learning, the compassion he had for others, and the peace he had cultivated over a lifetime. In releasing the attachment to his former identity, David was able to embrace a new, deeper purpose in life, one rooted not in what he did, but in who he was, in the fullness of his being. The path to authenticity is the path of letting go. Letting go of the stories we've held about ourselves, the identities we've clung to, and the pressures of societal expectations. It is the practice of sitting in the present moment with compassion, understanding that who we truly are is not confined by the labels we wear or the past we carry. As we move forward, let us remember, authenticity is not something to be achieved, but something to be allowed. It is the freedom to simply be, to express ourselves without fear of judgment, and to live fully in the moment. The more we let go of the illusion of control and embrace the impermanence of life, the more we align with our true, authentic selves. And in this alignment, we find the peace, joy, and freedom that have always been ours. So, be present, be authentic, and allow yourself to express the truth of who you are, without attachment or fear. Because when you do, you will find that life becomes an expression of your true nature, free, loving, and deeply connected to the world around you. Part 5. The courage to live authentically. Living authentically is not for the faint of heart. It requires an immense amount of courage. The courage to face the discomfort that comes with letting go of the false beliefs and stories we've been carrying for years. The courage to confront the unknown and the unfamiliar. For many of us, the thought of releasing the identity we've spent so long crafting can be terrifying. We've spent decades believing we are the sum of our experiences, our roles, our failures, and our successes. But when we begin to let go of these stories, we are left with one unsettling question: who will we be without them? This is where the true challenge lies. We fear the void. We fear what will happen if we let go of the very things that have defined us. Our jobs, our titles, our relationships, our successes, these have all become the masks we wear. Without them, we wonder, will we still be enough? The Buddha reminds us that the only thing in this world that is truly permanent is change. Everything else, the identities we hold on to, the beliefs we cling to, the attachments we have to people and things, are temporary. Change is the one constant in life. And when we allow ourselves to embrace change, when we allow ourselves to let go of who we once were, we make space for something far more powerful: freedom. The fear of change, of stepping into the unknown, is what keeps so many of us trapped in false narratives. We stay in relationships that no longer serve us, clinging to jobs that drain us, holding on to identities that are no longer true. It is the fear of letting go that keeps us stuck. We fear that without these things we won't know who we are. Buddhism teaches that attachment to fixed beliefs and identities is the root of suffering. Our beliefs about who we are, who we should be, and what we must have to be happy are all stories created by the mind. These beliefs become so ingrained that we begin to identify with them. We think we are our beliefs, but they are not us. They are just stories we've been telling ourselves. Take Rachel, for example. Rachel had spent most of her life as a caregiver. She believed that her purpose in life was to take care of others. She identified deeply with this role, thinking that being a caregiver was the essence of who she was. But as she entered her 50s, Rachel began to feel a growing sense of dissatisfaction. She felt lost, as though something was missing, yet she couldn't pinpoint what it was. One day, after a conversation with a close friend, Rachel realized that her entire identity had been shaped by this belief that she was only valuable if she was helping others. For years, she had placed everyone else's needs above her own, convinced that her worth was determined by her ability to care for others. But in doing so, she had neglected her own needs, her own passions, and her own sense of self. Rachel's story is a reflection of how attachment to the roles we play in life, whether as parents, professionals, or caregivers, can keep us from seeing who we truly are. When Rachel let go of the belief that she was only valuable if she cared for others, she began to find a new sense of purpose, one that was more aligned with her authentic self. She began to ask herself, what do I want? What brings me joy? In letting go of the false belief that her worth was tied to her role as a caregiver, Rachel found the courage to rediscover herself, not as someone defined by external roles, but as a complete and whole person, free to create a new path for herself. The unknown is often the most frightening thing we face when we choose to live authentically. What will happen if I let go of my old stories? Who will I be if I stop defining myself by my career, my relationships, or my accomplishments? Will I still be loved? Will I still matter? This fear is rooted in the belief that we need to control everything, our lives, our circumstances, and our identities. We think that if we let go, if we stop trying to hold on to everything, we will fall into chaos or worse, into nothingness. But Buddhism teaches that freedom comes not from control, but from release. The Buddha himself had to release his attachment to his royal identity, his comforts, and his life as a prince to find enlightenment. His journey was one of facing the unknown, of letting go of everything he had once held dear in order to discover the truth of who he really was. In the unknown, he found liberation. The same holds true for us. When we let go of the false narratives we cling to, whether they are about our roles, our expectations, or our self-worth, we step into the unknown, yes, but in that space we find freedom. Take Daniel, a successful architect who had spent his entire career climbing the corporate ladder. But one day, after years of building others' dreams, Daniel found himself at a crossroads. His life felt empty, and he began to question the very foundation of his existence. He asked himself, "What am I really doing? What is the purpose of all this success if I'm not fulfilled?" The fear of change kept Daniel stuck for a while. He feared that if he left his job and followed his true passion for art, he would lose everything. But with the guidance of a mentor and through self-reflection, Daniel finally made the decision to let go of the identity he had built around his career. He left his job and began pursuing his passion for painting. At first, the fear was overwhelming. He didn't know what would come next. But as Daniel embraced the unknown, he found that the fear lessened. He found joy in his creativity and peace in following his heart. In stepping into the unknown, Daniel discovered a life more authentic than he had ever known before. Living authentically requires courage. The courage to release the false beliefs we've been holding onto, the courage to step into the unknown, and the courage to be seen as we truly are, without masks, without roles, and without defenses. This journey of authenticity isn't easy, but it is the most freeing journey we can take. It requires us to let go of the false self, the self we've created to please others, to meet expectations, to fulfill our fears of inadequacy. When we embrace our authentic self, we are no longer enslaved by the past or controlled by the stories we've told ourselves. We become free to express ourselves in the moment, to choose what feels true for us, and to live a life aligned with our deepest values. And in this freedom, we discover a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, and a deep connection to who we truly are. The Buddha reminds us that the only constant in life is change. So, rather than fearing the unknown, we can learn to trust in it. We can let go of our attachment to old stories, roles, and identities, and step into the new possibilities that lie before us. When we do, we will find that the freedom we seek is already within us. It has been there all along, waiting for us to see it. The courage to live authentically is not about knowing all the answers or having everything figured out. It is about trusting that who we are in this moment is enough, and that, by letting go of the old stories, we are creating space for the most authentic version of ourselves to emerge. And in this space of letting go, we find that the freedom we seek is not some distant dream. It is our birthright, and it is already here. Part 6. Living in alignment with your true self. As you walk this path toward inner freedom, it is important to understand that it is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the truth of who you already are. In a world filled with external pressures, comparisons, and expectations, we often lose touch with the core of our being. We become so entangled in the stories we tell ourselves and the labels we wear that we forget the essential truth. You are always enough just as you are. The key to living authentically is to strip away the false narratives that have clouded your view of your true self. These narratives are not inherently part of you. They are external influences, ingrained beliefs, and societal expectations that we've come to accept as truth. But underneath all of them lies the true you, untouched, unblemished, and full of inherent worth. Living authentically is not about constructing an ideal version of yourself. It's about shedding the layers of illusion and remembering the essence of who you've always been. Buddhism teaches that the path to enlightenment is a returning, not a becoming. The Buddha did not create a new version of himself in his journey to enlightenment. Rather, he awakened to the truth of his nature. He realized that the answers were not out there waiting to be discovered, but were within him all along. Authenticity is not about finding something new. It's about rediscovering what was always there. In this process of self-discovery, there is beauty in the simplicity of who you truly are. For many of us, the idea of self-authenticity can be intimidating. We might fear that to live authentically means to break from the expectations of others, to disappoint family, or to risk failure. But the Buddha's teachings show us that living authentically is not about rebellion or rejecting others. It is about embracing the truth of your being. It is about living in alignment with your deepest values, not out of rebellion, but out of an inner peace and clarity that can only be found by looking within. Take the example of David, a man who had spent most of his life following the traditional path. He had climbed the corporate ladder, provided for his family, and met all the external measures of success. Yet, as he reached his 50s, David realized that his life felt empty. He was living according to everyone else's definition of success, but he had neglected his own soul's calling. It wasn't until David took a step back and embraced the Buddhist practice of mindfulness, sitting with his fears and doubts without judgment, that he realized the truth. He was not meant to live the life others had prescribed for him. By letting go of the story of corporate success equals happiness, David began to explore his passion for teaching and writing, which had been suppressed for years. In doing so, he didn't create a new version of himself. Rather, he reconnected with the part of himself that had always wanted to help others through education and storytelling. David's journey reminds us that when we align with our true self, we begin to experience the peace and joy that comes from living authentically. The beauty of authenticity lies in the fact that it does not require us to become someone we're not. It requires us to shed the roles and illusions that have kept us trapped. Living authentically, as the Buddha taught, is ultimately the key to inner peace. When we let go of the stories we've been carrying, the burdens of the past, the expectations of others, and the fears of what we should be, we create space for something much greater: peace, joy, and fulfillment. Our past does not define us. Our failures, regrets, and mistakes are just stories we can choose to release. Fear of the unknown does not need to rule our lives, and the expectations of others are merely projections of their own fears and desires, not truths we need to carry on our shoulders. The freedom that comes with embracing your authentic self is the freedom from all of these burdens, the freedom to be present, to live fully, and to trust that you are enough as you are right now. A beautiful illustration of this is Annie, a woman in her 40s who had spent much of her life living to please others. She was the go-to friend, the dependable colleague, the perfect daughter, always putting everyone else's needs before her own. But after a series of personal losses, Annie found herself exhausted, empty, and unsure of her purpose. She had followed the expectations of others for so long that she had lost touch with what she truly desired. Annie's turning point came when she began practicing mindfulness and self-reflection. For the first time, she asked herself, "What do I truly want?" She began to realize that the expectations of her parents, her friends, and even her co-workers were not aligned with her own dreams. She had been living a life of others' choices, not her own. Through letting go of the need to fulfill everyone else's expectations, Annie was able to create space for her own dreams. She decided to take a leap of faith and start her own business, something she had always dreamed of but never dared pursue. In stepping into her authentic self, Annie discovered a sense of freedom that came from knowing she was no longer bound by the expectations of others. When we let go of the false narratives and align with our true self, we enter a space of profound peace and freedom. The stories we carry from the past, whether they are of failure, rejection, or inadequacy, can be put down. We no longer need to live according to what others think or how society expects us to be. This is the true meaning of freedom, freedom from the shackles of the past, freedom from fear, and freedom from the opinions of others. It is the freedom to simply be, to step into the world with clarity, knowing that who we are is enough. It is not about striving to become someone else, but about becoming fully ourselves, without fear, without judgment, and without the need for external validation. I encourage you, as you walk this path toward authenticity, to take a moment each day to ask yourself, who am I beyond the stories I've been told? Who am I beyond the roles I've played, the titles I've worn, and the expectations I've met? The answer, dear friend, is already within you. It is waiting in the stillness. It is waiting in the quiet moments when you let go of all the distractions, the fears, and the narratives that no longer serve you. Trust in this answer and know that you are never alone. The wisdom of the Buddha and the truths that lie within you will always guide you back to your authentic self. The journey toward living in alignment with your true self is not always easy. It requires us to confront discomfort, fear, and uncertainty. But as we take each step, we move closer to the freedom and peace that is our birthright. With every moment we spend living authentically, we experience the joy of being fully present with who we are. This, ultimately, is the reward. Inner peace, a life aligned with our deepest truth, and the freedom to simply be. When we stop trying to meet the world's expectations and let go of the false stories we've been telling ourselves, we finally experience the peace that comes from just being ourselves, whole, complete, and deeply connected to the present moment.